I never imagined my life would come down to a moment like this, standing by my wife's casket, hands trembling, pressing redial on my son's number for the fourth time, while gray Chicago rain hammered the tent above. Every seat was filled except for one. The one Margaret had insisted we reserve, just in case David surprised us by coming home. The funeral director hovered nearby, his practiced sympathy making my stomach twist, but I kept my focus locked on Margaret's polished oak casket. White lilies, her favorite, cascaded over the brass handles, glowing under what little sun broke through the clouds. Guests arrived in black sedans, voices hushed. I heard the distant thrum of traffic from Lakeshore Drive, the world marching on. My sister-in-law, Evelyn, dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Cousin Mike adjusted his tie, glancing at his watch. People were here from 3 states to say goodbye. Everyone except my son. 5 rings. 6. Then finally, "Dad?" David's voice was tinny, muffled by laughter and music. "David, son, where are you?" My voice cracked. "The service starts in 30 minutes. A long pause. "Was that seagulls? Waves?" "Dad, I'm in Miami. Look, I have important business. I can't make it." Important business. My hand gripped the casket smooth wood so hard my knuckles ached. "Son, what could be more important than your mother's funeral?" He let out a sigh, as if the call itself was an inconvenience. "Honestly, Dad, this just isn't worth my time. I have to go." The call ended, leaving me staring at the phone's black screen, my reflection warped in the glass. Margaret would have known what to say. She always did, especially with David. She drove through blizzards for him, missed her own sister's birthday to attend his work events. She made excuses for 3 missed Christmases in a row. And now, while we stood here in the city she loved, he was sunbathing on Miami Beach. The first drops of rain mixed with tears on my cheek. "Mr. Miller," the funeral director said gently, "it's time to seat the family." I tucked the phone into my jacket and turned to greet those who'd shown up. "Thank you for coming. She would have loved this." I accepted condolences on autopilot. My mind kept drifting to David's voice, the finality of it, how it rang with a casual cruelty I'd never heard before. Evelyn squeezed my arm. "Where's David?" "He'll be along soon." I lied, the taste bitter. But Margaret deserved the truth, especially today. Thunder grumbled over Lake Michigan as I led Evelyn to the front row. The service began, rain on canvas, the pastor's warm voice, Margaret's photograph propped by a bouquet of lilies. She looked just like she had on our wedding day, hopeful, loving, and kind. The pastor spoke about Margaret's 35 years as a teacher, her unwavering faith and kindness, her pride in our only son. My phone buzzed against my chest, over and over. I tried to ignore it, but eventually, curiosity won. 3 Instagram notifications, from David's wife, Natalie. I tapped one. A video autoplayed, turquoise pool, palm trees, tropical drinks. "What a perfect day in Miami!" Natalie's voice chirped. There was David, laughing in swim trunks, right as the rain started pouring down on us here. I slipped the phone away, my shoulders rigid with anger. Margaret's entire life had been about family. She believed love could heal any wound. But some wounds, I was learning, were too deep for love alone. I excused myself, slipping behind the maintenance shed, letting the storm wash over me. For a moment, I saw it all, Margaret nursing David through pneumonia in college, defending him to friends, making excuses for every missed visit. Her last weeks, asking if he'd call, hoping for one more "I love you." Now here I was, dialing his number, rain mixing with rage. He answered on the second ring. "Dad, not now. I just saw Natalie's video, David. You're on a beach while your mother is being buried." Silence, then annoyance. "Look, I'm in Florida. The funeral isn't worth my time." Those words sliced through me. "She gave you everything. She's dead, Dad. Standing around crying won't change it. I've got a life to live. My anger turned cold. You're not my son anymore, I said, the words falling out before I could stop them. Good. Don't call me again. He hung up. I tried to call again. Voicemail. Third attempt. This caller has been blocked. The rain intensified as I stared at the phone, my own son blocking my number while his mother waited to be laid to rest. Somewhere in Miami, the sun was shining. I returned to the ceremony in time for the last prayer. Evelyn gestured for me to take the empty seat beside her. Margaret's seat. David's chair remained vacant, mocking me with its emptiness. Margaret always insisted on hope. Today, hope was just another knife in my side. When the service ended, friends and family asked about David, expecting to see him arrive late. I lied over and over. Thurman, my old friend from the job site, caught my arm. Where's David? He's in Florida. Vacation. Said the funeral wasn't worth his time. Thurman's eyes darkened. Margaret deserved better. Don't let him think this doesn't matter. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way, Jack. I nodded, letting the words sink in as we walked to the graveside. I had a choice to make. Margaret had protected David from consequences his whole life. But this was something else. I stood by her casket, surrounded by people who'd loved her, and made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let this pass. I spent the next few hours moving through the rituals of grief, accepting hugs, nodding politely at stories about Margaret's devotion, all the while my mind was stuck on one thing: David's empty chair. I could see it even as I thanked guests for coming. My son had called his own mother's funeral not worth his time. He was the only child we ever had, and now it felt as if I'd buried both my wife and my family. By the time the last car pulled away from the cemetery, Chicago's sky was clearing, but the heaviness in my chest stayed. I found myself driving the long way home, past Margaret's favorite bakery, past the school where she taught. I parked in our driveway, staring up at the brick two-story we'd called home for almost 30 years. The place seemed emptier than ever, its windows dark, her garden out front blooming in spite of everything. Inside, the silence pressed on me. I went through the motions, took off my suit, folded it carefully, and put on the old sweater Margaret had always said made me look distinguished. The smell of her perfume still lingered in the fabric. For a moment, I nearly broke down right there in the bedroom. Instead, I forced myself down to the kitchen and made coffee. Without thinking, I set out 2 mugs, hers and mine. It hit me hard. There would never be 2 again. I tried to eat, but food felt like cardboard. The house was full of reminders. The crossword book by her chair, her reading glasses on the mantel, the stack of sympathy cards starting to pile up on the hall table. I wandered into the living room and sat in Margaret's armchair, staring at old photographs. Our wedding day in '87, David's first Little League game, the graduation he barely let us attend, our last family Christmas together, Margaret smiling, David half distracted, always glancing at his phone. I spoke into the quiet. 40 years I raised that boy, Maggie. 40 years we gave him everything. When did ambition turn into selfishness? There was no answer, just the settling of the house and the distant rumble of the red line. Later that night, after a dinner I barely touched, I opened my laptop and stared at the banking site. For 8 years, Margaret and I had sent David money every month, first for grad school, then for the Manhattan apartment, then, eventually, for the mortgage in Brooklyn he'd insisted was an investment. The emails had always come with promises. Just until I get established, Dad. I'll pay you back. But he never did. And I never had the heart to stop. But now the hurt ran too deep. The funeral was over. The phone calls were over. Maybe, I thought, it was time for something else to end too. I pulled up the automatic payments. There it was, $3,200 every month, straight to David Miller's mortgage account. 96 payments. I did the math, over $300,000. The number made me dizzy. Margaret always called it helping our son build a future. But what kind of future did we build, if he could turn his back so easily? My finger hovered over the cancel button. I thought of Margaret's last words to me, weak but insistent. Promise me you'll take care of David. I'd kept that promise longer than I should have. Maybe too long. Maggie, I said to her picture, you believed in second chances. But maybe he needs something different now. I clicked. Cancel payment. The screen flashed. Are you sure? This action cannot be undone. I clicked yes. A confirmation email arrived instantly. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months, maybe years, lifted. For the first time since Margaret's diagnosis, I felt something almost like peace. Tomorrow, David would get a notification from his bank. No more automatic mortgage payment from Dad. He'd have to figure it out himself. The next morning, I brewed just 1 cup of coffee and sat in the kitchen watching the sun rise over our quiet neighborhood. Margaret's garden was in full bloom, roses, lilies, hydrangeas she'd planted for every anniversary. I made my way out to the backyard, trowel in hand. I dug in the dirt, pruning, weeding, watering. For the first time in weeks, the work felt good, like I was building something real again. A few days passed. The house got quieter, but not as lonely. My phone didn't ring. No desperate voicemails, no texts begging for help. I visited the cemetery every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers from Margaret's own beds. I told her about the new blooms, about the kindness of old friends, and about my decision. He'll call soon, Maggie, I promised her. He always does, when he needs something. Sure enough, a week later, the phone finally rang. David's name flashed on the screen. He sounded casual, like nothing had happened. Hey, Dad. I'm back from Miami. Bank says the mortgage payment didn't come through this month. Maybe the auto transfer glitched. Can you fix it? I felt nothing. No anger, no anxiety, just a quiet certainty. It wasn't a glitch, I told him. That's your responsibility now, David. Silence. He didn't like that. But Dad, you always… Not anymore, I said. You made it clear last week. Your mother's funeral wasn't worth your time. Well, your mortgage isn't worth mine. He started to protest, his voice climbing in pitch. But I stayed firm. Some lessons, son, you have to learn on your own. Then I hung up. I sat by the window with my coffee, watching the morning light spill across the empty chair opposite mine. It wasn't the ending Margaret would have wanted. But it was the beginning of something I should have done a long time ago. 3 days passed after I hung up on David. In those days, my phone was blissfully silent. I spent my time in Margaret's garden, pruning the rose bushes she nurtured, digging in the earth with hands that finally had no one else's burdens to carry. I cooked myself real breakfasts, not just toast or cereal, and in the evenings I found comfort in rereading the books Margaret left stacked on her nightstand. The quiet felt good, a stillness that was earned. Then, like clockwork, the calm was broken. David tried again. This time, he called from a different number, probably his office phone in New York, thinking I wouldn't recognize it. I answered with deliberate calm, sitting at our kitchen table, the late afternoon sunlight glinting off Margaret's favorite blue vase. Dad, please don't hang up. I know you're upset, but this is serious. The mortgage payment's overdue. They're threatening a late fee in my credit score. Can't you just send the money this one last time? I could hear the panic behind his forced composure. For once, he wasn't calling about family or to check on me. It was always about money. I remembered Margaret's quiet voice in the hospital. Promise me you'll understand him. Promise you'll take care of him. I'd kept that promise for nearly 40 years. But taking care sometimes meant letting someone stand on their own 2 feet, even if they stumbled. I answered as softly as I could. David, I'm not your safety net anymore. I spent 8 years making sure you had everything you needed. That ended the day you decided your mother's funeral wasn't worth your time. He didn't know what to say. I pictured him, pacing around his high-rise office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the window. He was so used to solving every problem with a call home, so used to Margaret smoothing things over, me making the payments, us picking up the pieces. He tried a new tactic. You always promised, Dad. You said you'd help until I was set up. You can't just pull the rug out from under me. David, I kept my promises. But you didn't keep yours. You promised to be there for your family. You promised to call your mother. You promised you'd pay us back. My voice stayed even, but my hands shook. When does it end, son? When do you become responsible for yourself? He went quiet. I could hear the faint sounds of New York, car horns' voices, the city that had become his home and, in a way, our replacement. I continued. Your mother defended you until her last day. She made excuses for every missed visit, every forgotten call. But I won't make excuses for you anymore. I won't fund your life so you can keep running away from the people who loved you most. The line went silent, then he blurted. This isn't fair, Dad. You're punishing me for something emotional. This is real money. You're going to ruin my credit, my apartment, my life. It struck me as almost funny, my son, who'd abandoned us in our darkest hour, accusing me of abandonment now that the money stopped. I looked out at Margaret's garden, the irises just beginning to open, sunlight glinting on the dewdrops. No, David. I'm not ruining your life. I'm giving you a chance to finally build your own. He hung up on me. I sat for a long time in the quiet, feeling the full weight of what I'd done. I knew the next call might come from his wife, Natalie, or maybe from some lawyer or banker. But for the first time, I didn't dread it. Instead, I felt a calm resolve, the kind that comes after a storm has passed and all that's left is rebuilding. Days went by. I started sleeping better through the whole night, for the first time since Margaret got sick. I found myself smiling at small things, the sound of robins in the morning, the sun streaming through the stained glass panel in our front door, the neighbors' grandkids waving from their bikes. I visited Margaret's grave every weekend, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with stories. I told her about the progress in the garden, about the neighborhood news, about how I'd finally learned to make her favorite scrambled eggs just right. I hope you'd understand, Maggie, I said quietly, laying lilies on her grave. Sometimes loving someone means letting them learn on their own. One sunny afternoon, as I was sorting through Margaret's books, the phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was not David, but Natalie. She sounded worried, not angry. Hi, Jack. I just wanted to. I mean, David's really stressed. He keeps saying you cut him off. He's not himself. She hesitated, voice softer now. I know things have been hard. I just wanted you to know, I'm sorry for missing the funeral. I should have come, even if he wouldn't. Her words caught me off guard. In all the years I'd known Natalie, she'd been kind but distant. Now, for the first time, she sounded real. Thank you, Natalie. That means more than you know. We spoke for a while, about Margaret, about the funeral, about how families can drift apart when the only thing holding them together is gone. Natalie admitted that David had always been ambitious, maybe too ambitious. She said she tried to talk to him, to make him understand. After the call, I sat in the living room, feeling something lift, a small hope, maybe, that things could still change. But even if they didn't, I knew I had done the right thing. That evening, I went out to the garden and watched the sun set over the city skyline. The air was cool, the sky streaked pink and gold, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The days rolled by, quiet and almost peaceful. I filled my hours with little tasks Margaret had always wanted done, fixing the garden gate, reorganizing the garage, even mending that old quilt she loved. Each chore was another small victory over the emptiness she'd left behind. Sometimes, I'd catch myself glancing at the phone, half expecting David to call and apologize. But that call never came. Instead, I heard about him through the grapevine. My niece Lisa called one morning, her voice low and conspiratorial, like she was telling me something shameful. "Uncle Jack, David's having trouble. Word is he missed a payment on his mortgage. Some of his friends in New York say he's frantic, asking around for a loan." I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Maybe, finally, reality was forcing David to look in the mirror. Maybe he'd start to understand the true cost of abandoning the people who loved him. A week later, the phone rang while I was pulling weeds in the backyard. This time, the caller ID read, "David Miller." Against my better judgment, I picked up. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, this has gone too far. The bank's threatening foreclosure. I could lose everything. You have to help me. Just until I get things straightened out. Please." It wasn't just desperation in his voice. It was anger, as if he blamed me for his troubles. I thought about all the years Margaret and I had made his problems disappear, the way she'd drive through storms or drain our savings to fix his mistakes. I thought about the funeral, that empty chair, the vacation video in Miami. "No, David. I don't have to do anything anymore. I gave you a chance to show up, for your mother, for your family, for yourself. Instead, you chose a beach and called her funeral a waste of your time." He exploded. "You don't understand, Dad. I have a job, a wife, responsibilities. My career, my whole life depends on keeping that place. You can't just pull out now." I kept my voice level. "You're a grown man, David. If you can manage a high-powered job in Manhattan, you can handle a mortgage. This isn't about money. It's about choices. Your mother made excuses for you her whole life. I won't do it anymore." For the first time, there was a real silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, could almost picture him struggling to find a way back into the safety net Margaret and I had always provided. "You're punishing me for missing the funeral. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, David. Your mother deserved better. You could have shown her one last act of love. You didn't. Now you're discovering what it feels like when there are consequences." He started to cry, real, angry tears, the kind I hadn't heard since he was a little boy, and scraped his knee in the playground. "You don't know what it's like out here." "I'm trying, Dad. I really am." I felt the tug of old habits, the urge to make it better. But Margaret's words echoed in my mind sometimes, "Jack, you have to let him learn." So I hardened myself, just a little. "I hope you do try, David. That's all I ever wanted. You can't keep running from what you owe, to your family or to yourself." He hung up on me. That night, I poured myself a glass of Margaret's favorite Chardonnay and sat out on the porch. The Chicago summer was just beginning, the scent of cut grass and lilacs drifting through the air. I watched neighbors walk their dogs, young families pushing strollers. I wondered how many parents out there were struggling with the same questions, the same heartbreak, the same impossible hope that their children might finally become the people they were raised to be. I called Thurman, my old friend, who'd always told me the hard truths when I needed them. "He called again," I said. "Wants me to save him from foreclosure." Thurman chuckled. "If he's got enough time to call you, he's got enough time to call his own bank. Don't let him guilt you, Jack. Sometimes the best way to love your kid is to let him hit the wall and bounce back on his own." We talked for nearly an hour, about Margaret, about the funeral, about the past. Thurman reminded me how much Margaret had sacrificed, and how sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is step back and let them learn. I slept better that night, a deep and dreamless sleep. In the morning, I found a letter from Natalie. She'd sent a real card, not an email or a text, her handwriting neat, a little shaky. She wrote that things had been tough. That David was struggling, but finally facing the consequences of his choices. That she'd started working extra shifts at the hospital to cover bills, and that maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call he needed. She thanked me for always being kind to her, and she apologized for missing the funeral. At the bottom, she added, "Margaret was the best mother-in-law I could have asked for. I wish I'd told her that more often." I wiped my eyes and read her words again. In that moment, I knew that even if David never changed, I'd done what was right, for Margaret, for myself, and someday, maybe even for him. The days grew longer, the garden bloomed brighter. Margaret's roses flourished, defiant against the city's summer storms. I visited her grave every Sunday, sometimes bringing lilies, sometimes bringing news, sometimes just sitting and remembering the sound of her laughter. Life didn't get easier, but it got clearer. Sometimes, love means holding on. Sometimes it means letting go. Summer swept through Chicago like a wave, bringing with it warm breezes and the hum of neighborhood life. For the first time in years, I found myself genuinely present, savoring morning coffee, tending the roses, waving to old friends walking their dogs along Sycamore Avenue. I filled my days with purpose, determined to make this house a home again, even if it felt half empty without Margaret's laughter echoing from the kitchen. Every so often, news about David trickled in, rarely from him, but often through Natalie, or mutual friends who reached out with gentle concern. I learned he was juggling side gigs, hustling to make ends meet. His fancy Manhattan address was a lot less glamorous when the rent was late and the bank sent warnings. Sometimes, I even saw his name pop up in group texts with family. "Anyone know if David's okay? He hasn't posted in a while." Natalie sent another letter, this time a short note with a photograph of their little apartment, looking stark and unadorned. She'd written, "We're making it work, Jack. It's not easy, but David's taking more responsibility every week. He misses his mother, he just can't say it out loud." At the bottom she'd drawn a heart and signed her name with a flourish. Her letters became a kind of lifeline, a reminder that sometimes people really can change, even if it takes heartbreak and hardship to make it happen. One Saturday, as I trimmed the hedges out front, a neighbor stopped by. Mrs. Simmons, who'd known Margaret for years, handed me a basket of fresh tomatoes. "You're looking better, Jack," she said with a kind smile. "Margaret would be proud of you. She always said you were the steady one." That night, I found myself sorting through old photo albums, searching for comfort in memories. There was Margaret, radiant on our wedding day. David, a toddler in overalls, clutching a toy firetruck. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family trips to Wisconsin dells, each picture a reminder of years spent building a life together. I paused at a photograph of David's high school graduation, Margaret clutching his arm, beaming with pride. He looked happy then. Young, hopeful, untouched by the sharp edges of adult life. What went wrong? I wondered. Was it something I did? Something I failed to teach him? But as the days went by, I realized that blame wasn't the answer. Margaret and I had given him love, security, and all the chances in the world. The rest was up to him. A few days later, David called again. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something told me to pick up. His voice was different this time. No anger, no entitlement, just exhaustion and honesty. "Dad, I just wanted to let you know. I sold the apartment. We're moving to a smaller place. I had to swallow my pride and ask for help, from friends, from Natalie's parents. I even picked up a job delivering groceries at night. It's not what I pictured, but I'm figuring it out." For a while, neither of us said anything. I could hear the city in the background, a siren, distant traffic, the faint echo of kids playing somewhere far below his window. "Dad," he continued quietly. I know I can't fix what happened with Mom. I know I let you both down. I'm sorry. I gripped the phone, struggling to steady my voice. Thank you for saying that, David. Your mother always hoped you'd find your way. I did too. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for anything, in fact. Maybe, finally, he was learning the lesson Margaret had tried so hard to teach, that life isn't about what you get, but what you give back, even when no one is watching. After the call, I sat in the garden as dusk settled over the city. Fireflies blinked in the twilight, and for the first time in a long while, the emptiness inside me softened into something gentler. Acceptance, maybe, or hope. I wrote a letter to Natalie, thanking her for her kindness, for sticking by David when things got hard. I told her that Margaret had loved her, truly, and that she would always have a place in this family. The next morning, I visited Margaret's grave with a bouquet of her favorite lilies. I stood for a while in silence, letting the sunlight warm my back, listening to the wind through the tall grass. Well, Maggie, I said, our boy's learning. It's slow and it's messy, but maybe it's real this time. I placed the flowers by her stone and smiled, imagining her gentle reply. You always said he'd come around in his own time. Maybe you were right, after all. I walked home through the quiet streets, feeling lighter than I had in months. Grief never really leaves you, but sometimes, on good days, it gives you permission to start living again. By late July, the garden was alive with color. Margaret's roses climbed the trellis, the hydrangeas exploded in blue and pink, and a pair of robins built a nest in the dogwood tree just outside the kitchen window. I kept busy, fixing things that had been ignored during Margaret's illness, repairing the back fence, repainting the porch swing, even teaching myself how to make her famous blueberry pancakes on quiet Sunday mornings. The neighborhood came alive too. Kids ran through sprinklers, neighbors shared gossip over lemonade, and every now and then, I found myself invited for a backyard barbecue, something Margaret would have loved. But even as life returned to a gentle rhythm, I still felt her absence, as if a part of me was missing whenever I reached for a second cup of coffee or turned to share some small bit of news. One humid afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I opened the door, and there was Natalie, looking a little tired but smiling. She handed me a small paper bag. Fresh bagels from Manhattan, she said. Thought you could use a taste of the city. We sat together on the porch, spreading cream cheese and watching the sun filter through the maples. After a while, Natalie spoke. David's different. It's been hard, Jack, but he's working. He even started volunteering at a shelter in Brooklyn, said he needed to do something for someone else, for a change. That caught me off guard. My son, always focused on the next promotion, the next opportunity, finally looking beyond himself? It sounded almost impossible. But sometimes the hardest lessons do the most good. I'm proud of you both, I told her, meaning it. And I'm grateful for everything you've done for him, even when he didn't deserve it. Natalie looked away, wiping her eyes. He misses you. He misses Margaret. Sometimes, at night, I catch him looking at old family photos on his phone. He wants to call, but he's afraid you won't answer. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I thought of all the missed chances, the angry words, the empty seat at the funeral. Maybe, I realized, it was time for another small step forward. Later that evening, I called David. He'd picked up on the first ring, his voice uncertain. Dad? I heard you've been working hard, I said, keeping my tone light. And that you're helping out at the shelter. That takes guts. He let out a breath I hadn't realized he was holding. Yeah. It's not easy, but it feels right. Different, you know? I think Mom would have liked that place. She always said you could find yourself by helping others. We talked for a long time, about everything and nothing. David told me about some of the people he met at the shelter, The stories that made him think twice about what really matters. He admitted he still missed Margaret, that sometimes he woke up expecting to see her smiling at the kitchen table, just like old times. I shared stories of the garden, the robins, the neighbors, and even a few of my own failings, how I'd struggled with loneliness and anger, and how sometimes the only thing that helped was doing something with my hands. Toward the end of the call, David said quietly, "I wish I could go back. I wish I'd been there for Mom. I can't fix that, but I'm trying to be better now. For her. For you. For Natalie." It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was honest, and it was real. For the first time in months, I believed him. After we hung up, I sat out in the yard as night fell, fireflies blinking above the roses, the city's distant hum a gentle reminder that life goes on. Grief still ached inside me, but it wasn't the sharp, desperate pain of those first weeks. It had softened into something else, something that looked a lot like hope. The next morning, I opened my email to find a message from the shelter in Brooklyn. "Thank you, Mr. Miller, for raising a son who cares. David has become an important part of our team." There was a photo attached, David, sleeves rolled up, handing out meals with a tired but genuine smile. I printed it out and placed it next to Margaret's picture on the mantel. "You'd be proud of him, Maggie," I said softly. "He's learning. We both are." The summer thunderstorm rolled in that night, pounding rain on the roof, rattling the windows. I made a pot of coffee, curled up in Margaret's favorite chair, and let myself remember all the good she'd brought to our lives. For the first time since she died, I knew I could keep going. Not just for me, but for the family she'd worked so hard to build. And as the rain faded into the steady quiet of midnight, I realized that second chances are possible, even when you think you've run out of them. August faded into September, and with the change of season came a gentle, almost invisible shift in my heart. The pain of Margaret's absence remained, but the sharp edges dulled. Memories surfaced less like waves crashing and more like sunlight breaking through the clouds, soft, golden, and unexpectedly comforting. One bright Saturday, I found myself organizing the annual neighborhood block party, something Margaret had always loved. Children played tag between picnic tables, and neighbors brought casseroles and cold drinks to share. As dusk settled over the city, I sat on the porch, listening to laughter ring down Sycamore Avenue, feeling, for the first time in a long while, that life was moving forward. Midway through the evening, my phone vibrated. It was a message from David. "Thinking of you tonight, Dad. Miss you. Can we talk soon?" This time, I didn't hesitate. I texted back. "Call whenever you're ready. I'll be here." Within minutes, the phone rang, and I picked up, bracing myself for another difficult conversation. But instead, David's voice sounded steady, even hopeful. "Hey, Dad. I just wanted to thank you for everything. For sticking by me, even when I didn't deserve it. I finally get it, what you and Mom tried to teach me all these years." We talked well into the night. He told me about the people he'd helped at the shelter, how some had lost everything but were grateful just to be alive, to have one another. He admitted he still missed Margaret every day, that the regret never quite left, but he was learning how to live with it and let it guide him, not ruin him. I told him stories he'd never heard, about Margaret's first teaching job, about the time we got lost in Wisconsin and ended up having the best weekend of our lives, about how proud she always was of him, even when he couldn't see it for himself. As we spoke, the distance between us began to shrink. The past was still there, every mistake, every harsh word, every missed opportunity, but it no longer defined us. What mattered was the choice we made right now, to reconnect, to forgive, to begin again. Later that week, David surprised me by coming home for a weekend visit. He drove all night from New York, arriving on my doorstep just as the sun rose over Lake Michigan. Natalie joined him, carrying a tin of homemade cookies and a small bouquet of Margaret's favorite lilies. We hugged in the driveway for a long time, the kind of embrace that says what words can't. I'm sorry. I'm grateful. I love you. The three of us spent the weekend sharing stories, tending the garden, and cooking the dishes Margaret loved best. For the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter, clumsy, tentative at first, but growing stronger with every shared memory. That Sunday morning, David and I sat together on the porch, watching the birds flit through the garden. "Dad," he said quietly, "I know I can't go back and change things. But I can be here now. I can be better, from this day forward. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Tears filled my eyes, but this time, they weren't for loss. They were for the return of hope, for the possibility of new beginnings, for the realization that Margaret's legacy would live on, not just in flowers or photographs, but in the simple, everyday acts of love that knit a family together. As September faded into autumn, I found myself embracing the future with a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. Margaret's garden flourished. The house, once heavy with silence, now echoed with conversation and music. I made plans for a trip I'd always put off, a drive along the Great Lakes, something Margaret and I had dreamed of but never done. On the morning I left, I placed fresh lilies by Margaret's headstone. "I did my best, sweetheart," I whispered. "You were right. Sometimes love means letting go, but it also means believing in second chances." Driving north, the city skyline fell away, replaced by forests blazing gold and red. I felt Margaret with me every mile, the memory of her laughter, the strength of her love, the lessons she taught both her son and her husband. David called that evening, his voice cheerful, asking how the drive was going, promising to visit again soon. As I pulled off the highway to watch the sunset over Lake Superior, I realized that the story wasn't ending at all. It was beginning again, in new forms, with new understanding. Family, I finally understood, isn't defined by perfection or the absence of pain. It's made, and remade, every day, by the choices we make to show up, to forgive, to try again. And so, under a sky lit by the last light of summer, I whispered a prayer of thanks, for Margaret, for David, for the gift of a love that endures even after goodbyes. The past was behind me. The future was wide open. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was ready to live it.